All right, so this is a Monday on Purpose call. It's one of two calls that we have inside the Substack subscriber community here at Creative on Purpose. So pleased to have Seth and Cato and Penny, some of our frequent offenders here on the call. And what we do is we just discuss ideas, concepts, principles, philosophies, practices that apply broadly to anyone that is doing work that matters, that wants to make a difference, that is trying to make a dent in the universe through some sort of endeavor that aligns with who they really are, what they're really good at, and where they really belong. And today, I put forth the idea that we could talk a little bit about advice, feedback, and criticism. And conversation is going to revolve around maybe starting with definition of terms, which is always a good idea. What do we mean by advice, feedback, and criticism? And then which is most helpful to you and which is most helpful when to you? So I'm going to just open it up to whoever wants to raise their hand and speak first. And I bet it's going to be Cato.
Yeah, I've done a lot of deep thinking about this. You nailed that. Well, in part because one of the things I was just thinking was when I hear the word feedback, I try to reframe it as response. And that's what I try to cultivate in people that I'm teaching how to come to the table work when they're working on something new. How do you start to learn how you're responding to something, analyze why, and decide, is that useful for this person or is that because of my personal whatevers that go on? Woo. And whenever you're hearing like a new play or something, and how to start figuring out, that's the beginning, understanding how you're responding to work, to giving valuable feedback to whoever you're giving it to about what they're doing, but to reframe that as response. And the best I got this in part because we at the National Theater Institute started calling the invited people who would come in who are playwrights or act very like major people, and they would give the best responses. And I started practicing like what do they do to organize their responses, because they would give such valuable things and then really activate the students with whatever they were doing. And I did an analysis of it, and thinking of them as responders was this kind of switch for me. Instead of like, oh, I'm here to give feedback, it's more, no, I'm here to understand my response, filter it, and figure out what might be useful for you. That's my job in that. And then the other part of the thing is I've been also looking this past year at what is the agreement that we come to a table with beforehand. Like what are those? And that's the way you can also spark that idea of the beginning conversation. Where are we going? What's my level of agreement as I'm coming to the table? What are my around expectation? Not about that we're going to agree, but that we're going to come to a space in a state of agreement. And how does that tip into it? So those are my initial bursts of things I've worked on around this idea of feedback's the one I pinged on. What were the other ones, Scott?
Well, the advice, feedback, and criticism were the three that I used. I just want to quickly reflect that I love that your closing I comment about like setting what we often called building the container. Like
Oh,
what are the parameters, what are the boundaries and guardrails around this conversation? Like, because I think, you know, um, that's one of the things that I wrote about this first in my very first book, The Stoic Creative, because of conversations that we were having around the distinction between feedback and criticism in the Alt MBA and in the Akimbo workshops. And, Akimbo workshops were designed to try to get people to provide helpful feedback, and to avoid giving unhelpful criticism. But it all begins with what you're saying, Kata, with the agreement that we are coming to share our work out loud and in public and invite responses, in the pursuit of getting better at what we do. So I really appreciated that layer of your response.
Yeah, I like that too. But I think with criticism for me, um, if you're criticizing, it's what you're criticizing. If you're criticizing the work and not the person, and also that you're not diminishing what's been done. I think criticism so often comes in and you feel diminished, and I don't think that's helpful. I think I like the whole response idea that Cato had. So that's what my brain did.
Yeah. Well, I like that the feedback, advice, or criticism says as much about the person delivering it as it does about the work that's being
Exactly.
advised, critiqued, or fed back on, for sure. Yeah, that's a great point. What do you think, Seth?
For me, like so I started writing online in 2001, was a music blogger, writer person. Thought I really had it figured out. And like I had it figured out for me. And then I started a site for AOL Music. All like I thought, hey, I know what I'm doing. And then I got a writing gig for a kind of a prestigious outlet. And there were all these other prestigious writers on there. And I always felt like that's not really me, but whatever, I'll give it a go. And I remember now, mind you, all those years, I was just the one running things. So no one critiqued anything really that I did. We had the numbers. I was the editor. I was like, yeah, that's good. That's good. Now all of a sudden I'm the writer and someone was editing. And I remember the first time getting that Google Doc back from a prestigious editor. And just I was like destroyed. Really, like red marks and this and that, and this doesn't make sense, and this and that. And it really like beat me up. That criticism, but was it criticism? I don't not. I mean, it was criticism of the work. I know it wasn't at me, but I of course took it that way because I hadn't encountered it before. So, but I think that criticism led me to, well, I don't really want to be doing this anyway. Like I didn't really want to be like the amount of work because there were there's these levels. Like I mean, they're at that point, like there's these, prestigious New York Times caliber writers, or in the music world, like Pitchfork and this and that, Rolling Stone. And that just wasn't going to be me. That was the dip for me of like, am I going to go through that and like get through that criticism and make all those changes and do all this just to get up here? And I like just kindly bowed out of that. I was like, okay, thank you. Thankfully, I still got paid for that article that never ran. But I was like, thank you. I'm out.
Yeah, well, I love that that addition of like intent. Like, what am I signing up for? And what do I want from, putting my, like, I think there's, it is an act of courage at any level to put your idea out there, up against other people's scrutiny and expectations. And and if you're doing that so that you can get better at something, like what are you getting better at? Because I love that, I used to, I don't know if you ever read the Oxford American music issue. Oxford American is out of Oxford, Mississippi. It's a great magazine. I don't think it's around anymore, but they had a music issue every year, and I loved reading that. But it was so funny to like, you could see everybody kind of writing kind of in this same kind of um like self-deprecating, questioning, clever style. And so like you could read about a bunch of different musicians or musical creations, but you even though you're reading it by 50 different authors, they all kind of rhymed in the way that they approached it. It was like, and I remember thinking like, oh, I'd love to submit something to this. And then I wrote something. I was like, this sounds nothing like an Oxford American music piece. This would be roundly tossed out. Just on the face of it, I think I will, forego. But yeah, like, what are you trying to like? What are you trying to get good at? And who are you putting that work in front of? matter if you're going to make meaningful progress in the
Well,
specific pursuit.
and in that last time, because last time we were talking last week, I mentioned the work that right now, as I'm learning this new industry in a writing field, so an adjacent field, but what I learned from the first time I went through learning how to write for a thing was to, when I'm initially learning how to do this, to not have a work I feel so that it's so or it means so much to me that I'm gonna be squished when it gets, because I'm still learning how to make it even good. So like right now, I wrote test things that when they get squished, I go, interesting. I'm a little like down, but then I'm like, all right, well, I'm going to dig in and learn how to do this because I don't care if I have to take it apart and do it again. Because it, and that I'm holding on to learning how to be better at what I'm crafting to write the ones that I really care about. And those I want to be really good anyway. So like, well, how do I test it? And also test the field, test other people, learn how to have a useful conversation and have a thing that if it gets disregarded or they go completely sideways, what I learned is they go completely sideways, or how to interpret what is coming at. So like how to test those things, how to know when I'm sending a test. Sometimes I'm doing a little ping just to see, if, okay, if I push this hard, what happens? What kind of resistance do I meet? What kind of joy do I meet? Or do I get invited back? And so like understanding that from my point of view about how I'm putting, which work I'm putting forward, when, to whom, how am I listening, and then figuring out, or is this someone that I want to continue moving with or really pursue this, or how do I really get their attention, or someone like, okay, good to know. So what are those things? So myself as an artist or somebody putting forth work, that is also part of the equation, to not just cast my beautiful thing in front of people that might be so rude with it.
And
Well,
I think also that you can, like, what I was thinking as I was listening to Seth is some of these things that happen and you find out you don't like them, it helps you better inform yourself to where you want to go. Oh, I don't want to do that. I mean, I've quit clients because they weren't working like I wanted to work, but I didn't know enough to really clarify that's the way I wanted to work until it happened and I quit. And then now I'm doing what I'm doing today, which wouldn't have happened if I hadn't quit the job that I was doing.
Penny,
yeah,
I love that. I use so much of this on that. I say negative, but I don't mean it. But like, yes, this is the thing I don't want to do. These are the feelings I don't want to have. This is the scrutiny I don't always want to be under. Where else can I go then? At least I know I don't want to do that. Let me try this over here. Absolutely.
one of the things that I've been thinking about is, way back when, this is like 2016 or 17, I wrote The Stoic Creative, and I talked about feedback versus criticism. And some of the things I arrived at were, feedback is something that you seek out, and you usually are reaching out to people um, whose work you respect, or whose opinion you respect, or who you feel will have meaning. Like there's a level of intention about feedback that's missing often from criticism, because criticism often is coming unsolicited. Just look at your social media feed, right? I mean, there's always, Penny, you and I know of specific people we could call out who are notorious for, they just have to come in and weigh in on your stuff, not because they're trying to help you get better at, like, help you arrive at better ideas, but they're actually just trying to prove how smart they are. But I don't, and so recently I've been rereading Adam Grant's latest book called, I think it's called Higher Potential. And if you're not familiar with him and his work, it's all good, but this book I'm finding lots of insights in, and he talks about the difference between advice and feedback. Like feedback, and Cato, I think you and I have talked about this, like feedback often comes in the form of like cheerleading or feedback for the sake of feedback, right? Like in the Akimbo Alt MBA world, we have like this thing that we call Akimbo feedback. Like there's a certain tone and a certain delivery and a certain implied intention behind it that's not always about the work necessarily. Like sometimes it's that feedback for the sake of feedback, or feedback that doesn't come across as feedback at all because you couch it in all sorts of, like, asking questions and I wonder if, um and so one of the things that Adam Grant says is, like, if you're actually trying to get better at something, it's better to actually just ask for advice from, like he talks about when he was trying to become a better speaker, he would ask for feedback from the class that he was speaking to, and the feedback would be terrible. Like, oh, you suck. You sound like Darth Vader when you take a breath. Your jokes, never land. Like, it was just like, it was just people's opinion about what he had just done. Where when he turned it to asking the teacher whose class he was speaking to, give me one piece of meaningful advice for how I could do this better next time, he would get much better feedback that would actually help him become. But layered onto that is, like, it doesn't matter what level you're at. If you're trying to make progress, what got you where you are won't get you where you want to be. And so at any given point, criticism, feedback, or advice can actually be helpful if you know how to, this is my thinking, is if you know how to process it. Like, I actually don't mind when some cranky know-it-all curmudgeon, critiques me on social media, because I, I have thick enough skin and enough confidence in what I've been doing and what I am doing and what I want, that I can, like, oh, he said it really terribly, but there's actually a there that's worth me paying attention to. And I don't mind a little cheerleading. I think, when I was giving guitar lessons, the worst thing I could do with a beginner is, like, let me give you a little advice on how you can do that better next time. It's like, no, you just say, that was fantastic. Let's do it again. There's a moment when cheerleading is really helpful. And so, you know, I think you can be intentional about what you're asking for feedback on, why you want, or the advice, feedback, or criticism, what that's for, where you're going, how it helps you get there. And just to touch on one point that Cato made, you know, if it doesn't hurt a little bit, it probably doesn't matter that much to you. So, like, there is that moment where I remember when I first was in the marketing seminar putting up, like, my website, which was terrible. I mean, it was just like, it was terrible. I knew it was terrible, but when people told me it was terrible, it would, like, hurt a little bit, but then I would get, like, these helpful suggestions for how it could be better. And it actually, by the end of it, I had a much better website and a much better direction for where I was going. Um, but I think if it hadn't hurt a little bit, I probably would have just eventually given up, because it wouldn't have, like, no, if it doesn't matter, it doesn't matter. But so I just think Cato mentioned response, like asking for responses instead of feedback. And I think we can also be a little bit more responsive about how we take feedback, because sometimes we have to hit the pause button on the reaction of, oh, my feelings, and sit with it for a minute so that we can process it and extract the value from the criticism, the feedback, or the advice in the pursuit of making something better.
One of the things that we work with playwrights a lot of times is when you're hearing your work for the first time in public, whether it's an invited reading or sometimes a public reading and random people have come. When you're hearing the talk after the thing, we'll have a little talk back session, pretty quick one. But to not have the playwrights speak during that, or not much anyway. And the reason for that is because you can very quickly shut down what would have become a valuable insight, or as you're just listening to the reactions. And also, you don't have to listen to them if you don't want to, but to not escalate them or squish it. too soon in order to really hear what's going on. And I know one of the things I would try to teach my students when I would teach them playwriting, when we started to learn to talk about the work together, because that's what would create a self-mentoring group eventually, that process of how do you create the language and how do you learn to engage with the work, and also look at the work for what it's trying to do, not necessarily even what the playwright's trying to do, but what is the work really saying? And is this intentional? So the artist starts to learn that and hear that. But for you as the listener to start bringing that to that table. And I would work with them saying, if you can learn to be valuable at this table work session, you will be invited to other tables. And the more you can learn how to speak, but not try to be clever, but simply bring these things you know, and here's how to build your sense of knowledge so that you have the thing you can draw into, like, this reminds me of this work and this reminds me of that, is that, here's how that functioned. And to be able to bring that to that table, you will be invited to another table because you're valuable at this table. So to cultivate that sensibility, because you always need that in every artistic field, and it doesn't matter whether you're working design, whether you're acting, whether you're directing, producing, whatever that level is, writing, you're going to be invited if you can cultivate this sensibility, and how to do it quickly and get to it without wasting too much time or gushing too much, like give enough and then.
The famous shit sandwich. That's how we were told to give feedback in Alt MBA. Say something nice, give them the shit that they need to hear, and then close with something nice.
I think with us is close with the push. That's the way that you start with something that really, and part of that's that learning to, what did I respond to? What brought me in? Sometimes things are boring for a while, but to notice what brought, and I will prompt an audience when they're coming to see a new play. Like, what will be useful is, you might notice something caught your attention. And I want you to notice that moment. What is it that caught it? Why weren't you interested before? And then, and then how did that keep you in? And that's the kind of thing to start to share at the end when we'll ask you, what were you thinking, or whatever. Like, those are the moments, those are little trigger moments, because you're always going to start with something positive, like, this part really grabbed me. That's what we're going to start with, right? And then go, but the stuff before that, I didn't know what was happening, or like what are these, in order to help prompt because it's like learning to pay attention to your attention, to be able to give valuable feedback and valuable responses. So, and you can coach that at the very top of whatever you're doing. And then you can get like this really valuable stuff, and encourage conversation after too, not just the formal raising your hand, but later we're all going to mingle for like 10 minutes. And if something really grabbed you, you want to say it, please tell that person, tell that actor, tell that playwright, tell that director, let them know. Don't leave the theater without letting them know. And that kind of gets this whole kind of bubbly thing going.
Well, there's two things that you said that really are worth highlighting. One is, the fastest path to the change that you want to make actually is going to come through conversation. And with other people, right? The conversation going on in your head is not going to get you where you want to go. And the other thing that you're saying that I think really is important is that articulating your ideas and providing feedback are both skills that you get better at by practicing, right? And that I love that idea of, like, if your objective is just to be able to stay at or get invited to other tables so that you can continue to hone your craft around these presentation and response ideas, that can be really helpful. And the other thing that you said that I also want to mention is, like, cultivating that awareness, like being able to pay attention to what you're paying attention to, being able to hear what you're saying as you're saying it, and have the empathy to, like, see how it might be being received. Any final thoughts, Seth and Penny? I've got one super hack to close with, but
Oh.
any final thoughts?
I'm good.
I'm good. I appreciate a lot of what Cato said. I think that
Yeah.
was interesting. Yeah.
Well, the one thing that yeah, so I don't know if you saw the post that I put over the weekend, but I shared something that Seth said on one of our 2 conversations this year on my broadcast where he's talking about like the main point of the Song of Significance. His new book is Let's Talk About This. And I
That's awesome.
like, that's part of why we're having this conversation, is because like that's such a simple and such a powerful thing, like to just be willing to say, I mean, and could it be more missing in the public discourse right now? Like this idea of let's talk about this instead of let's shout at each other about this, or let's, throw bombs at each other about this. Um, but, one of the things that I also was thinking about as I was reviewing what I had said way back when in the Stoic Creative about this is you also like it helps to have like if you're going to go on this adventure in self-discovery and self-improvement and getting better at your craft and getting better at making the difference you want to make by soliciting feedback, criticism, and advice, you have to have some tools in your toolkit for what you're going to do when something catches you off guard, or when there's a statement comes at you kind of sideways and knocks you off, and you go into kind of reactive mode. And in the Stoic Creative, I cited this quote by Epictetus, where he would when someone would be criticizing him and it was not helpful and it was not accurate and it was not in any way going to and paying any attention to it was only going to cause him further harm. His phrase was, "They are nothing to me," which sounds really super harsh because Epictetus is always super pointed and acerbic and kind of like almost offensively direct. I actually used that line on someone once in a Stoic discussion group, and they literally like did the equivalent of crying in a thread that we were on. So over time, I softened that language, and the language that I use now. And if you've heard this from me, I apologize that now you know what I really meant, but I will often say, thank you for sharing your perspective, which is really just a way of me, number one, saying I can't respond to that right now because I'm dealing with this inner dialogue of my own that I have to sort out before I can say anything actually meaningful. But also, like, I mean, Penny, we've talked about this. Like sometimes you just get really shitty comments from shitty people that are just meant to shit on you. So I could.
That's the way they feel about themselves. It's not there. It's
It
masquerading
always says
in
more.
us. Yeah.
It always says more about them than it does about us and our work. But you need a way to, like, I used to be the kind of person, because I look like this and this is the way we're built. I have to justify and rationalize. I have to change your mind. Like, no, you don't understand.
Yeah.
Let me explain. And now I just say, oh, thank you for your perspective, because now we all get to walk away. I've acknowledged that you've said something that you think is important. I've let you know that I've heard it. Let myself know that I'm not paying any more attention to it. And now we can all like go about our day so that we can, make meaningful progress. So that's what I leave you with today. So if you're listening to this as a broadcast or a podcast episode, these are the kind of conversations we have every Monday and Friday in the Substack subscriber community here at Creative on Purpose. If you would like to join conversations like this with cool people like Cato, Seth, and Penny, we would love to have you join us. And I'll look forward to seeing you all on Friday.
Good.
Thanks,
Thank you.
guys.
Have a great week.
Thanks,
everyone.
guys.